Our speaker today is Dr. Clarence Geier, Emeritus Professor at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And his talk, History in Bits and Pieces, The Battle of Cedar Creek, focuses on work that Geier and students have been carrying out at that battlefield in Virginia. Over the past several decades, battlefield archaeology has developed an expertise and sophistication, and National Park Service archaeologists such as John Corneliuson, Stephen Potter, David Orr, Richard Fox, and Douglas Scott have actively pioneered the use of technologies such as metal detecting and GIS to collect and analyze data about battles, such as the Battle of the Little Bighorn and Civil War battlefields. Even after 150 years, we're still learning new things about the Civil War battles and the battlefields where they were fought. Clarence has been involved in National Park Service Civil War archaeology since 2000. We've invited him to come and speak to us today because he is an acknowledged expert in Civil War battlefield archaeology, and he will be talking to us about the methodologies that were used to collect and analyze data to reconstruct part of the cultural landscape over which the Battle of Cedar Creek was fought. Clarence, thank you for accepting our invitation to speak today.
My pleasure. If I can, what I'd like to do first is give a little bit of an overview on the battle that we are going to be talking about. And I do that primarily because the real focus of the paper isn't necessarily on the battle, but rather the things that we've been trying to do to more or less bring it to life from a historical and archaeological perspective. The Battle of Cedar Creek is the culmination of what's referred to as Sheridan's 1864 battle campaign. The campaign itself starts in September of 1864 with the battle between him and Jubal Early's force, the Army of the Valley, in September of 1864 at Winchester. The Battle of Third Winchester is followed up by the Battle of Fisher's Hill, and then a basic deterioration of the Confederate forces, which results in Sheridan's army moving rapidly down the valley towards the area of Stanton and Harrisonburg. And then from that basic point, we have what's referred to as the burning of the valley, a rather notorious event in the history of the Shenandoah. Following that event, which ends somewhere, about early October, maybe the first week in October, the burning actually progresses as Sheridan withdraws. And what he does by October 14th is he takes position on the north side of Cedar Creek. Cedar Creek is kind of this natural slash that extends east-west across the north end of the valley, from the north end of Madison Mountain over towards the North Mountain itself. His army goes into camp. The camp itself is a massive thing. If you can imagine 37,000 troops under tent in what's basically a transient city that was scattered over 6 miles, that's in effect what we're dealing with. The Army felt very secure in itself. It was very satisfied with the fact that Early's army had been defeated. There was no hurry, and this is a significant part because when you begin to look at this particular battlefield, one of the things that's notoriously missing from many of the areas is any effective effort to really defend the camps. They would have come into being, but the troops are quite frankly very lackadaisical, and with the exception of Emory's 19th Corps, which pretty much holds the center of the field, there's very little by way of any developed earthwork fortification at all. To their horror and to their surprise, Early has been reinforced with the division of General Joseph Kershaw, bringing his troops up to about between 17,000 and 19,000 effectives. He follows Sheridan up the valley, and on October 19th, very early in the morning, about 4 o'clock, he staged a dawn raid that catches the troops pretty much by total surprise. He will rout one entire corps, the 8th Corps, and then the Union troops will begin to establish a series of defensive lines that ultimately allow the Union Army to withdraw from the field. and by about 11 o'clock in the morning, they're about 4 miles north of their original camps. The camps are all in the control of the Confederate Army, at least those that were not withdrawn. So the morning attack is a very successful battle. It is certainly something that is celebrated locally around here by members of the Confederate sympathy. On the other hand, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, what will happen is that Sheridan is able to reorganize at least two of the basic corps, infantry corps, as well as a very highly effective cavalry division that's commanded by Brigadier General Torbert. And they will counterattack. A number of things will take place, but the punchline is they basically rout the Confederate Army from the field, and by 10:30 that night, you've got virtually the entire Confederate train that has been captured, as well as somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 Confederate troops. The value of this, it comes at a very important time. First of all, it's a very important battle. It's a very important victory that contributes to what is Grant's 1864 campaign. But it also comes at a time that pretty much lays the groundwork for a very positive attitude going into Lincoln's re-election as President of the United States. From a more local basis, it's significant because what it does is it provides the Union virtual control of the Shenandoah Valley from that point until the end of the war itself. So anyway, that in a very quick nutshell, that's what the battle is all about. The slide that I'm putting up here gives, it's important to actually talk about who does most of our work. All of our projects are worked out of an undergraduate institution, and almost all the people that do the work in terms of students in our undergraduate program in anthropology, many of whom go on to graduate experience. And basically the protocol is to train them in field work, but give them also experience in terms of interpretation, giving presentations at papers and so forth that help them develop their careers. We also are very fortunate to have been able to establish a collaboration with members of the Northern Shenandoah Valley chapter of the Archaeological Society of Virginia. And these people are a real treasure because they are trained metal detectorists, and they have contributed dramatically to the importance and to the end results of what we've been able to accomplish. Let me go up one more slide. One thing that, just by way of, my presentation talks about the idea of history in bits and pieces. The overall battlefield at Cedar Creek, without even considering the starting off points for the Confederate Army, covers about 125 square miles if you consider the terrain that's involved. As we've addressed this study, it's very unusual for us to have any real sizable parcels. In some cases, we've had as small as 45 acres. In other cases, and what we're working on right now, we've got a parcel that's close to 600 acres in size. The various groups that have been involved include people who are very much interested in preservation and interpretation. In some cases, it's just a matter of generating an inventory of sites on the battlefield. Probably our largest candidate of work is the actual Cedar Creek the battlefield of Cedar Creek and Belle Grove National Historical Park. And from that standpoint, we work to do the overview and assessment of virtually all of the known cultural resources, everywhere from prehistoric through military, that are on the battlefield. We did a little bit of additional field work for them, but most of the work that we did for them was primarily work that had already been accomplished, much of which we had done. All of these groups, regardless of what their intent, do lie on land that is battlefield-oriented, and as a result, most of the procedures that we've used, most of the protocol, have been those that have been designed to accommodate the interpretation and the analysis of a battlefield or an encampment sort of setting. We document everything, whether it's prehistoric, whether it's domestic historic, whether it's modern, old, or whatever, as part of our general protocol, even though in almost every case, and there's probably one exception, our primary reason for being on the land is to interpret the military significance of the battles that are involved. If you look at this slide right here, This is the identified boundary for the Cedar Creek Belle Grove National Historical Park. It is the newest of the federal parks system, and the reason I show it is all of these lesser areas that you see outlined in red pretty much identify the areas that we have effectively covered at what would be considered a Phase 1 level. By that we're talking about doing a typical, those things involved with actually identifying and locating the varieties of cultural resources that are on the land. Two of the areas that are of particular importance, and we'll talk about them, are this one right here and this one that you find up at the north end along what's known as Middle Marsh Run. These two are joined by the fact that they're land that is owned by Carmeuse Lime and Stone. It's a quarry, and they have recently received permission to develop and expand their quarrying operations in these two areas. And as a result of that, as part of their agreement with the local county, they have agreed to conduct not only a Phase 1, but they've been very successful in allowing us to move ahead to actually doing Phase 2 evaluations of all those sites that have been deemed historically significant on the property. And indeed, in one area down at this southern end right here, we've actually conducted what would be considered a Phase 3 level or a mitigation level of archaeological recovery. But in fact, most of the work that we've got is tied to the Phase 1 level, or this introductory level of investigation. What I want to talk about first here, if I could, is the basic perspective that we're using in doing the work. And a lot of what we're building on is not just located in terms of identifying specific sites of any kind, but on dealing with issues of natural, of various types of landscape. And we break this down into three levels, whether we're dealing with trying to reconstruct the natural level landscape, the cultural landscape, and then the last one would be a military landscape. And all three of them focus on the land and its potential for use or the manner in which it was used. We start off with a natural landscape, and what you see here are just a series of images from different settings on the battlefield, and just to give you some idea what the various elements do in fact look like. But the most important thing here when we talk about the land is I want to emphasize the fact that we do more than just take a cursory look at it. I mean, a lot of Phase 1 studies will deal with, they'll talk about what the vegetation is supposed to be like and what the geology is supposed to look like and the hydrography and all of these things. And in some cases, they'll do it in a fairly superficial level. But one of the things that we focus on here, since we're dealing with the military landscape, is that the nature of the terrain, the nature of the physical circumstances on the land that we're dealing with, whether it's 45 acres or whether it's the 500, 600 acre Carmeuse particle, but all of this land is key to understanding it, not only in terms of the domestic use of it, but also the way it tends to shape various forms of military action. I mean, logically, anybody that studied terrain circumstances or battlefield circumstances understands that the nature of the terrain can have it can be a primary determinant in terms of shaping a defense, shaping an offensive pattern of action. And certainly, if you understand the terrain, the ability to use the various features that are available for defensive posture can be very much a key aspect if you're taking a defensive role. But on the other hand, if you're not aware of the lay of the land and you are beginning to fight over it, that absence of knowledge can have a very negative effect in terms of your effectiveness. So the natural land itself is important, and what we do is, since we know that we're on a battlefield, the land itself is the archaeological site. It's not just what is on it, but is the terrain itself. The ravines, the hollows, the bluffs, the flatland, the rolling hills, all of these different things, where there's water, where there's not, just a whole network of things are things that we're very aggressive in trying to pursue, because ultimately all of it does become a key player in understanding the site, which is the battlefield itself. In terms of cultural landscapes, we're just confronted with the reality that if you really consider many of the battles that took place in the Civil War, They weren't unprepared battlefields. Nobody anticipated the Battle of Gettysburg taking place where it did. Nobody anticipated Antietam taking place where it did. And Cedar Creek is pretty much along the same general line. And yet at the same time, those battles which did take place took place on land that had already been occupied, that had already been developed. And in fact, many of the conditions of that developed landscape are actually key to understanding everything from how troops were encamped to where and how battles shaped and flowed and things such as this. One of the things I think that I believe very strongly is it's not just enough to look at the military maps and what they talk about, but really part of the key to understanding what can and cannot take place is understanding the cultural setting that's in place that tend to shape those battles. Same is true of encampments. I know there's a lot of growing interest in terms of documenting major periods of winter and summer encampment. And in those conditions, again, those circumstances, again, not only situations of terrain, but the availability of land that allow troops to be massed in large numbers can have a real bearing on where those kinds of things do and do not happen. And cultural landscape is also a big deal, because if you go to a lot of the military records, despite its importance, it amazes me continuously how little is actually said about it by many of the people that are generating a lot of the action reports and things such as that. So it really does take an effort to reconstruct it. And at least at Cedar Creek, we're very fortunate because many of the military historians, and we've got two, or military cartographers, and we've got two real key ones here in G.I. Gillespie for the Union and Jed Hotchkiss for the Confederates. Both of these men recognized the importance of the cultural landscape, and as they created models then of the actual battlefield themselves, a lot of that data is included, and we have been, as a result of our survey, been able to confirm a lot of the logistics of it through actual field documentation and field recovery, validating it in a lot of ways. So then you obviously get to the military landscape, and this would be, given the natural terrain, given the cultural setting that's in place, the extent and the manner to which those features are actually used as part of the battlefield accounts and so forth. This map, which is one of those that I mentioned before, this one's put together by the Union cartographer Gillespie. Was generated in 1873. But I think the one feature, not only do you find a large number of the positions that are held by various troops at various points in time, but Gillespie is a real saint in many ways because he really goes out of his way to add features such as terrain. You can actually see the terrain. You can see the streams. You can see roadways. You can see farms and houses. And one of the things he adds that really is even a greater blessing is the fact that he'll include field fences and lines. And I say that that's a blessing because many of those things, at least in Gillespie's map, as we go out to walk the land and look for these things, he's remarkably reliable. If he says there's a stone wall there, we're going to find a wall. If he says there's a house there, we're going to find a house site. If he says there's a road there, we are going to find a road. It may not be exactly in the same place, but it's certainly part of it's pretty close. It's close enough to be a real asset and a real thing for us. Okay. And yeah, we got those three things as major issues in what we try to define. In terms of how we do this, and again, the methods that we use are nothing really new. I've been very fortunate in collaborating with people like Matt Reeves, who did work for the National Park Service at Manassas, Doug Scott, Joe Belichky, and others. I would say what is perhaps most positive about what we have to say here is not so much that our methods are new, are unique, or whatever, as much as they are the fact that in applying these things, they've actually worked. They've been very positive in actually identifying both encampment and in identifying the sorts of activities that you deal with, battle flow and so on. In terms of records available, obviously you start off with the various battle reports, that are in the OR. That's one particular place. Obviously, many battles, Cedar Creek, Antietam, Fredericksburg and so forth, have numerous authors that have attempted to discuss the flow of the battle. Here, probably one of the more memorable ones is the work that's done by Ted Marr in 1992, and he really does an excellent job of putting troops in place on the field and so forth. So that's a real asset. Certainly, maps, and I indicated the map of Gillespie and Hotchkiss as being a real treasure for us in trying to accomplish what we're trying to do, and certainly it's a very positive thing. But what's also very important is that, particularly today, many of the reports that we've got were written about 10, 15 years ago. There are a couple exceptions to that. But in the last decades, you've got a tremendously significant body of new information, primary records, military records, letters, diaries, and so forth that are coming out from a variety of sources. And we're fortunate in the sense that some of those new documents and records are very relevant to adding layers of information to what's going on in certain parts of the battlefield we're dealing with. This thing, when you see on the slide, for example, was written, put together actually by a man named Lieutenant Harry McKern. This was done in 1870. The battle is over, and he and a friend of his are sitting on a bar or having dinner or something like that, and he takes a napkin and draws and doodles part of the battlefield. As it turns out, it's part of the battlefield we're actually working on and interpreting, but this had never been seen. And what he's talking about, he gives a location of certain defensive features, Sheridan's headquarters, he identifies key roles, but then he also makes note about two of the principal battle lines that were maintained by the 29th Maine as a key part of the battle we're dealing with. But, I mean, this is all new information, and it tends to give you a new insight and a new opportunity to figure out exactly what is going on. So obviously that's something that needs to be dealt with. I would also argue that when we're dealing with historic archives and records, any of you that have been dealing with this, you really do need to be collaborating with someone who is not just a good historian, but a good military historian. In our case, we've been very fortunate to work with Dr. Joseph Whitehorn, who is retired from the Quartermaster Corps of the Army. And he has a working knowledge not only of the language, but he has a working knowledge of where many of the historic documents, the historic records, the primary ones are. And he's able to access these things. And again, by going straight to the original records, many of which haven't even been interpreted, he's able to give us insights into various aspects of the battlefield that are not really available otherwise. Probably the only other thing that I would mention here in terms of historical research, and this moves from the standpoint of historical archaeology to the importance of material culture, because going to not only the material culture of the Civil War and the military, and in our case we're dealing with both infantry, we're dealing with cavalry, and when we deal with cavalry we're not dealing only with the troopers, but we're dealing with the physical remains that would be associated with the maintenance and the presence of horses. When you look at all of those kinds of things, it takes time, first of all, to get some sense of what you would expect to find on those kinds of camps as a guide to interpreting what you're seeing. And even with that, when you consider that instead of finding the whole artifacts, you're finding bits and pieces, many of which are heavily rusted or broken, the whole art of trying to make sense out of what may be a massive artifacts, but to give them meaning and interpretation that allow you to contribute. It's a major part of the operation and the activity. In terms of what we do, a lot of what we do has been guided by what is, first of all, obligated by general Phase 1 sorts of studies as established by the guidelines of the state of Virginia. In other cases, they are guided by the experience of people, either our own experience that we've had in the field or by interacting with other people who have worked on similar sorts of projects and have given us guidance in terms of hints in terms of effective use of metal detecting and things like that. So again, while I want to go through a different series of techniques and then talk about what we've got as a result of it, there's nothing really new or sacred, I think, in terms of what we're doing. First off, we have the ever-popular systematic shovel test pitting by the guidelines of the Commonwealth of Virginia. if we are to do this work effectively for our agents and for our clients rather and for the quarry, minimally what we do is we put, and realizing that archaeological sites are oftentimes underground, what we do is we establish our grids of 50-foot squares using a laser transit that allows us to compensate for terrain and topography and stuff like that. And at least no less than every 50 feet on land that is, not 45 degrees in the slope or something like that, we will put shovel test pits. This normal shovel test pit's about a foot in diameter, and it'll extend to what we consider subsoil, or that level of soil where there's no evidence of cultural termination. I must tell you that in my experience, working on several military sites, both encampment related and battlefield related, this is probably one of the least successful of all techniques. There have been areas of known battlefield encampment that we've worked on where we knew there was a substantial body of material, and maybe as a result of putting in like 300 test pits, we'll come up with one mini ball. So that is not a successful technique at all. Obviously, it's something we do. It's useful in terms of identifying prehistoric sites. It certainly has value in identifying historic sites that tend to have substantive concentrations of artifacts. But at least in our experience, both in terms of field work and both in terms of battle flow and encampment, it's been pretty ineffective. Visual reconnaissance is actually something that's very important. We do visual reconnaissance. And again, I want to emphasize, when we do visual reconnaissance, it's not just to go for looking at those places where we think we're going to find sites, but we do visual reconnaissance to really do a thorough investigation of the landform itself, and there's a reason for that. If all you do is rely on topographic maps for terrain and topography, whether you're using a 10-foot contour or in some places even a 20-foot contour, they simply do not generate or provide evidence of the nuances that are there. We looked at one area along a section of the battlefield where you had a stream called Meadow Brook entering, and you have basically a gorge within a maybe a quarter of a mile would drop dramatically, almost 200 feet as it enters Cedar Creek. And you look at these things and you look at the topographic maps and you get a nice V-shaped valley. But then when you actually walk those things along the gorge of the trench of the stream itself, that is not documented on the maps, you may have anywhere from a 10 to 15 foot tall vertical bluff that is where the active stream is. And while you may have gradual slopes up above that, that bluff becomes a very effective barrier to any kind of potential rapid troop movement that you're going to be dealing with as you go through. But those are the kind of nuances that you don't really get from topographic maps, and it's not just what you get out of walking over the land that's easy to go across. On the other hand, once you get into the more desirable landscapes, visual reconnaissance certainly has been very effective for us in identifying everything from rifle trenches to stone walls to the basement features of abandoned houses that were on the battlefield at the time. And those are obviously very significant features as we get to the cultural landscape. But like I said, the idea of shovel test pitting is not that great. The visual reconnaissance adds a tremendous dimension. But what we also learned, we did develop a technique that allows us to combine a phase one principle with controlled metal detecting. And if you look at this image right here, let's say that's an established grid that we did over part of the site that we did, and we've dug our shovel test pits at the various nodes, the various points like that you can see. And let's say we found maybe something, maybe found nothing. But what we did as an extension of this is we used these same transect lines like that and like that are placed at every 50 feet. And what we did was we collaborated with metal detectors, trained metal detectors. I emphasize the word trained. And what they would do is they would walk along one side of the transect and then reverse themselves, coming back, in effect giving us about a 10-foot wide area of effective scanning. And using that technique, anything that they found, any hit, whether it was wire, a nail, whatever, or whether it was iron or brass or anything that we found, because you don't really know what it is until you look at it. What they would do is they would recover that, and then we had teams of students working with them, and as they moved along, you can see this line of hits pretty much on this image right in through here. As they would move into those areas, they would recover the artifacts, and using a coding system, they would identify the artifact as coming from this particular place, and then we would go back with a transit and an a Nikon transit system. And what we would do then is we would record all of those individual hits, all of those individual artifacts, and you can see some of the variations of things that we were coming up with. And we use the ArcGIS software, which allows us to place not only the transects, but the specific location of all the artifacts we find back onto topographic space. As we identify each artifact type by category, as you see over here, we're able to identify each hit, give it a label, give it a functional category, and then we're actually able to look at different types of artifacts and the physical patterning that they have. As a technique in terms of using, as a means of identifying and defining military features, this technique has worked for us really very well. Obviously, it doesn't encompass everything that's on the site, but as a means of helping us define site boundaries, it's pretty effective. In terms of what we've found, and again, this is military. These are all features that we have found on the actual landscapes of the battlefield itself. We've identified at least 4 different mill complexes and all the associated mill structures, mill races, and things like that, mill ponds, all of which tend to shape and limit the use, certainly, of many of the waterways that are part of the battle, in some cases contributing to the defenses of certain features. Moving from that, we've been very successful in identifying a whole array of different agricultural complexes. The land that we have been dealing with is land that has been, it was actually some of the first land taken up in the Shenandoah Valley. It's, for the most part, very rich agricultural land, and as a result, at the time of the battle, there was a wide variety of the different categories of farming operations that are typical of this particular area, including, this is Belle Grove Plantation. Belle Grove was the headquarters for General Sheridan at the time the camp was established, and we've been able to identify not only the main house, but structures around it, and a whole array of everything from slave quarters to barns to things like that that would have been in place at the time of the battle itself. Going to the other extreme, down here, we also identified the remains of a 60-acre scratch farm that had been acquired in 1820 by Timothy O'Connor and Charles McCarty. They were both first-generation Irish immigrants. They married sisters, and because they didn't have money, they were individually, they were able to buy a 60-acre of what really is very bad, very secondary farm. But they actually lived on it together. They lived together. They had their houses next to each other on the same property. They shared ownership, and they had developed a farm that was actually active then on the battlefield at the time of the Cedar Creek action. The last one that I mentioned here is Nieswander's Fort. This one is a little bit further north, but Nieswander's Fort is significant because it was established in the 1750s. So it is an initial settlement site, but also at the time of the battle, it was part of a fairly extensive 400-acre farm that had been totally cleared and was an active agricultural activity, and will become one of the places that is occupied by a cavalry division that I'll talk about in just a minute. In terms of cultural landscape, I think it's important to indicate that one of the things we look for are not just the major structures, but we really go out of the way to document historic roads, some of which are still in operation, some of which have become abandoned. We do everything we can to identify stone piles, clearing piles, fence lines, and that whole network of things that would have been actually on the land. And again, in that regard, we're very fortunate because Gillespie in particular, when he documented this area, really did give us some fairly effective placements in terms of where not only the roads were, but where the fence lines were as well. And what's really neat about that is where he said there was a fence, we've actually found evidence of the fences, and some of those lines are actually still actively used in the farming operations going back into the 1960s. But as you look at this map right here, the roads are really kind of important for us because the roads themselves, which were established primarily as farming operations going either to the local milling sites or to places like Middletown that you see over here, or Strasburg, which is actually down in this area. You have the main Valley Pike coming up and pretty much going through the heart of the battlefield area. But these roads were established, for local commerce. But for our purposes, what we found is that same network of roads was used by the military as a means of connecting the camp itself. Remember, the camp was something like 6 miles long, and this same line and network of roads was used to connect the east and west ends. Logically, the supply trains that were used to house and support the various divisions would have moved along these roads. So they're a very significant feature for the camp itself. At the same time, as the battle commenced, certain of the infantry groups, the 19th Corps that's down in this area, the 6th Corps that's up here, and the cavalry camp that we're going to talk about in just a moment that's up in this area here, as the battle moved towards them, they were able to effectively break their camp. And at least the 6th Corps and the cavalry camps we're going to be talking about were able to be deployed off. So even though the troops were involved intensely in military actions that took place, rather than getting overrun and having the tents and the materials of the men being pretty much vandalized by the Confederates, these two areas were, again, using these roads. They used these same roads to withdraw to the north off the field. And as a result, even though we've got the remains of the camp, you don't find a lot of the devastation or the burning or other sorts of activities that you see at some of the camps that were actually overrun. But again, the roads play a role. Visual reconnaissance not only identified farms and farmlands and stuff like this, but it did help us identify some of the earthworks that were constructed. And really the only significant line of earthworks that was in place at the time of the battle was constructed by General Emory's 19th Corps, moving from the Valley Turnpike up across Meadowbrook up and through this area through here. And we were able to effectively locate the remains of those earthworks and map them, as you see here. There were some earthworks that were constructed as part of the 8th Corps operation. The 8th Corps held the left flank, and they were the first troops to be effectively hit. The earthworks that were in that area have been lost pretty much to road construction. The only other features that we were able to find were small fortified pickets that sit above almost all the major known fords that run pretty much the length of the camp along Cedar Creek. If there was a ford crossing anywhere near the actual encampment, we find the remains of these small earthwork things overlooking them where infantry troops were guarding the access and the movement of people across the fords. The primary mechanism that we've got, though, in terms of locating things of military significance, as I mentioned before, is the systematic use of these transects for identifying various military activities. And what you're seeing here is the application of that technique. If you look, you'll notice that most of the artifacts that you see here scattered are in lines that tend to identify and conform to these various transects that we were talking about as part of the grid activity. But what we found was on the extreme right flank of the Union line, it wasn't an area where we had battle flow. The battle actually moved around it. But this was one part of the major encampment that was part of the operation put together by Phil Sheridan. If you were to go to the south on this map, the 6th Corps infantry was in place there. If you were to go to the north on this map, the 3rd Division of General George Armstrong Custer was in place there. But we had known from a number of very general comments. There's not a lot of information certainly provided by the Union Army on the exact placement of its camps. But we had general information on Gillespie's map, and we had actually more accurate information on Hotchkiss's map for where the major encampments were. And in this area, which is a long marsh run, this area right in through here, there was evidence that a camp was in place. We did all the 50-foot grids that we were talking about before, and we did find a few historic sites, but in terms of military activity in this area, we found maybe a handful of things that may have been military in application. But obviously, it wasn't the camp debris that we expected. When we came back and used the same grid as a means of using the preliminary metal detecting reconnaissance, everything just popped up. And what we ended up finding was a general position of the camp itself. Now, at this point, all we really got is the general position. But on the low terraces, the terraces and low bottomland slopes of the valley along the marsh, and almost totally within the area that is Nieswander's Fort, the north boundary there, the north-south boundaries down to the north boundaries up and through here. But an area covering about 165 acres, we were able to outline the physical boundaries of this massive Union camp and begin to get some evidence of patterning itself. The logic being that not that you had a continuous flow of troops, but that different groups were apparently occupying different terrace lobes, in many cases with a physical separation, separating them on the field of battle. This will give you this image here. This is pretty much what the area looks like. The actual spring is right here, or the run is right here, and then you can see the weathered terraces back up in this area where the camp was, pretty much there. Give you an idea of what we're probably seeing here is something like this. This is the cavalry camp at Geesboro, and you can see where you get like a company or a regiment of troops here, and then a physical separation and another group there and another group there. And that really does seem to be what the case is. The actual farm itself was right here in this area, and just recently we've been able to determine that there's some evidence of encampment right here. These areas here, this slope wasn't really used. This is something totally different up and through here. But we're beginning to find out, or we're beginning to find that maybe the house itself may have been used as a headquarters for the 1st Division, and the commander in the field here was General Wesley Merritt. Two full brigades were active in this area. One was commanded by Colonel Charles Lowell, and the other by Thomas Devlin, two major players in terms of the overall activity. This camp will be abandoned, or excuse me, it will be broken down and it will be removed from the field before any military action takes place. But the troops themselves are very active agents in terms of what's actually taking place on the battle. Let me jump ahead right here, because we did have the opportunity as well to do what would be considered phase 2 metal detecting. We did identify an area on the south side where, because of impending destruction by the quarry, they allowed us to go ahead and really work the area. So what we did in that area was we devised a technique that, again, focused primarily on metal detecting. And we used the same 50-foot survey grid that we used for the initial metal detecting and for the shovel test pitting. And in each 50-foot grid area, we made 2 passes, actually 4 total passes. We would move east-west and then north-south, trying to cover the whole thing and recover all the artifacts. And what that did was it allowed us to recover many of the initial, the really heavy artifacts like bullets and things that would give a very large, heavy sound. What we did then was, oftentimes using a second metal detectorist, we took the same grid and we did a second pass that was the same thing, north, south, east, west. And the purpose there was to look for things that were smaller and were going to give a more light signature. And this could be everything from some small nails to buttons to firing caps and things like that. And when we use that technique in this area, it really worked very successfully. Here we're at the south end, and this is about a 125-acre area that we were dealing with that Hotchkiss's map had indicated would contain part of the 6th Corps infantry camp. You can see it right here on this map right there. We went into the area. You can see very faintly the grids right there that we used for the shovel test pitting. And using that same grid now, we went over and did total artifact recovery. And this is pretty much what we came up with. This includes melted lead. The only thing you don't see here are nails, which are very clearly part of the area that's there as well. But drop bullets, melted lead, clothing parts, gun parts, all of those things that you would expect to find in a military setting, either in an encampment or in a battlefield debris or in a battlefield setting. And if you look at what we've got here, using that pattern, you can actually see a line of drop bullets, melted lead, and it's reinforced by nails and things like that if we were to add those kinds of things. And we've got evidence of what looked like two streets, or two parts of the streets that were occupied by the 6th Corps, 6th Infantry Corps. So the technique really works pretty well. If we put it on a topographic map down here, this road that you see right here is the same as this road that you see right here. This road that you see coming down there is the same as this road right here. So we've got things that frame it. And when we're done in placing this interpretation, you've got this road coming down there, this road coming through, a street coming through there, and there's the remains of a third street that actually comes up right in this area, right in through here, pretty much putting us exactly where Hotchkiss says the south end of the encampment would be. So we're very fortunate. That's one of the things that come up. But we also know that this was an area of very intensive military activity. So we look at a couple of different things. The historic accounts give us indication of intensive battle flow. The 29th Maine and the 90th New York were in position right above Meadowbrook. This is the road that we were just looking at. The camps we were just looking at are up in this area right in through here. But the 29th Maine was encamped down below. And you have then a battle flow. And a lot of this flow that we're looking at right here, these lines that you see here are reports in terms of the military accounts. But where these lines go actually are consistent with where we found possible corridors that troops under fire and trying to move rapidly could feasibly move. So we start with that. We have two accounts from the 29th Maine. And the 29th Maine say they first took position right on this high ground, right above the bluff, and they describe providing cover fire for members of the 19th Corps and the 8th Corps that are moving this way, trying to get out of harm's way. As they are in the possibility of being flanked, you've got Kershaw here, you've got Gordon here, you've got Ramser here. As their position is about to be flanked, they will move back to a second position, and then ultimately a third, and then they're going to move off the field altogether. But what's interesting here is if we go back to that same place we were just looking at before, and we eliminate those things we're fairly certain are camp-related or camp-related, some of the scattered is still there. But if you look right in this area here, you get this whole line of drop bullets, but there are none of the other camp debris. There's very few nails, there's virtually no melted lead. There's no evidence, like I say, of the things you'd expect at a camp, but you do find a few clothing parts. You do find things like bayonet fragments. You do find, like I say, a line of drop bullets that pretty much suggests the possibility of where the second line, not this line, but the second line they're going to form back up in here would have taken place. If you take that again and look at Hotchkiss's map, Hotchkiss describes the flow of the Confederate Army as they move against the camp area of the 6th Corps. And if you look right here, here's that camp. This is where we found that camp activity right here. This is exactly the flow that you've got right here. And if you look and put this on the battle, this line that we're talking about right here is pretty much right in this area there and pretty much conforms to a logical second position for the 29th Maine, as they would have moved back to take position as part of the right flank of a defensive position up here and hold back the advancing Confederate corps. So very quickly, that's pretty much what we have to say. So if there's any questions, I would be glad to respond to them.
Does anyone have questions? Hello? Are we still on?
I am here.
Okay.
Dr. Geier,
yeah.
Stan Bond, and so you're not using GPS to locate your units. Wouldn't that? I just wonder if that might be a little faster technique instead of shooting them in with a transit.
We have tried the GPS system, and while it does have a level of accuracy, we're trying to get something a little bit more precise. So we pretty much stuck with a method that it works for us. We obviously use GPS. We'll document any of the structural features, fence lines, all of the collateral features, roads, and everything else, and we will combine that or integrate it with the artifact placements and so forth. But at least that's the technique that we've been using. I know that Bob Jolly, who's with the DHR, has done work up at 3rd Winchester, and I know they've used the GPS system there fairly effectively. But actually, the process we've got down moves really fairly quickly for us because we're pretty much used to doing it.
Okay.
We have a question here from SEAC.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Geier. This is Tim Roberts here at SEAC.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
One moment.
This is Tim Roberts here at the Southeast Archaeological Center.
Okay.
And enjoyed your talk. I thought it was interesting that you could parse out the different groups and their different camps and be able to see these different areas with divisions in between, these geographical sort of boundaries in between. I was wondering, in terms of the artifacts, if you saw any sort of patterns of diversity, between these different parts of the camp.
Actually, we do, and that's an important thing. I did not get into that because of pretty much the time constraints. But if we go back to that 9th Corps camp or that 6th Corps camp that we talked about, one of the things that we found was that in one of the rows or one of the camp streets, we kept finding this stuff that didn't make any sense. We found that a large number of 69 caliber round balls, and these were basically used on muskets that by 1864 were, just simply not used. So we were confronted with, are we looking at overlapping camps? What's the situation? But this is where getting in contact with somebody who knows the ins and outs of military sources becomes important. Because what we were able to find was that the 5th New York Heavy Artillery Battery that had been in Washington, D.C., had been mobilized to go and join with the 6th Infantry Corps at Cedar Creek. But since they did not have effective weapons at that time, they'd pretty much been held back in the Washington area. When they deployed, the only guns that were available were 59 caliber muskets. So they actually went into the field as part of the 6th Corps with the 69 caliber muskets, and we've got this little interesting order that was deployed at the time of the action, where the men were ordered to, as they came across dropped Confederate or Union guns that were still usable, they were to discard their muskets in favor of the superior grade weapon. So you get that. And then the next row down was kind of interesting because, again, it was an infantry line, but we kept finding large quantities of Sharps bullets, okay, far more than you'd expect to find in an infantry line. You'd expect to find them in a cavalry camp. But then we found out that the 105th New York Regiment, that was a group that was participating as part of the 6th Infantry line, or 6th Infantry Corps at Cedar Creek, had actually the year before purchased their own carbines and were actually using them in the battle. So, differentiating the types of bullets, for example, in that case, allowed us to take 2 of these streets and not only identify the streets, but get down to possibly where various companies and regiments were deployed. So there's no question that differentiating military sorts of features, such as that, can be very useful. On the other hand, what we're finding very frustrating right now is that we've got this massive cavalry camp that we're actually in the process of trying to look at in terms of defining internal patterning. Most of what we did originally allowed us to define the boundaries of it, and now what we're doing is looking at the internal organization. And while we're finding a lot of drop bullets and things such as this, and where we're finding areas of horse material as compared to where horse debris is not there, that's going to give us some functional differences, it's been pretty hard to actually break it down in terms of the brigades and regiments that were in place there, at least to this point.
Thank you very much.